Hi everyone, my name is Nata, and welcome back to the second part of the data collection tutorial. If you haven't seen the first part, please go and watch it. But this part will be focusing on some specific tips for data collection per lifecycle stage. So this is quite self-explanatory, but I still want to make sure that the most important things about it are clear. I think the thing that I repeat most to the clients is that all the weights and other amounts of the raw materials that go into the production of your product need to be provided to us per functional unit. So if the functional unit, for example, is 1 cubic meter, then we need to understand what materials are used to produce 1 cubic meter of the product. We need the information on every single material that is used in the manufacturing of the product, including the packaging of the product. We need all the amounts in all the respective units. It can be kilograms or liters or whatever, depending on what kind of material it is. We also need to understand who the suppliers are of all the raw materials and where they are located. When it comes to the manufacturing energy, so the energy that is consumed during the manufacturing process of your product, there are a couple of ways to measure or calculate the energy that is required. The method that we prefer is individual measurements of all the machinery. So you can put electricity meters on all the machines that are used during the manufacturing and measure the amount of energy that is required per functional unit. Sometimes this individual measurement is not possible, however, and then the energy consumption can be derived from the total energy consumption of the factory. So, for example, you know that per year, the year 2023, you consumed this amount of electricity, but you also know what the output of your product is, and then you can calculate how much electricity was consumed per functional unit. Sometimes, in very unfortunate cases, the energy consumption is completely unknown, and the only thing that you have access to, the only information, is the energy bill. In some cases, we can use the energy bill to estimate what the energy consumption is, but this is really the last resort. When it comes to electricity, we always like to understand who your supplier of electricity is and what the mix of energy is used to produce the electricity. Because if it's gray electricity, it's going to have a very high impact, and if it's green electricity, the impact is going to be much lower. So that is very important for the results of the LCA. Maybe you just plug in your machinery into the grid, and then we model the electricity consumption using standard database references. But maybe you have a contract with a greener electricity supplier, and then we can model that as well. Other utilities, apart from electricity, are also very important, such as the consumption of natural gas or water, etc. So we also like to understand how much of that is consumed per functional unit manufactured. We also like to understand what manufacturing waste occurs during the production of the product. So where might that waste originate? Usually the waste comes from losses of material during production, for example, extrusion losses or cutting losses when you cut a product to specific dimensions. And sometimes there's other waste, such as discarded finished products that failed the quality control and other sources like that. So we want to understand the quantities, so the amounts of losses per functional unit, and also what happens to those losses. Are they recycled internally? Do they just go back into the manufacturing process? Or are they recycled externally? Or maybe you just throw them into the general bin, because we will need to model that as well. When it comes to distribution, we want to understand where the product is distributed on average, where your clients are located, and sometimes we will ask you to tell us the percentage shares of the sales per client location so that we can understand and calculate weighted average distances. We also want to understand what transport is used during the distribution. Is it ship? Is it truck? Is it plane? I hope it's not plane, because that always has a very high impact, but I trust you. And if ship transport is used, for example, then we also want to understand what ports of arrival and departure the ship goes through, because that helps us calculate the transport impact. Sometimes the product that you produce will need to be installed or deinstalled at the end of its lifetime. To calculate the impact of this stage of the life cycle, we require you to provide us data on the energy and material inputs that are required to install or deinstall the product. And if the specific energy consumption, for example, is not known, then we want to understand what equipment is used and for how long. So for example, a specific type of drill to screw in a product, and then we can calculate the energy consumption of the drill per the amount of time that it's used for. The installation and deinstallation phases of the life cycle are often excluded from the assessment because you do not need to install or deinstall the product. But in some industries, such as the construction sector, we do need to include the installation and deinstallation phases. As I mentioned in the first part of this data tutorial, so in the first video, the use phase and the end-of-life phase of your product are usually modeled based on secondary data. We will use various assumptions, such as average or standard values across the industry or the region from LCA guidelines or from regional statistics. And we can also use additional scientific literature to make assumptions. In the electronics sector and the textile sector, the energy used during the use phase of the product is often based on consumer behavior surveys. So if you have that information, then we also like to know. Additionally, if you have any specific information on what happens to your product at the end of life, then we also like to know. Most of the time, you will not have any information on that. However, if you have a take-back service, please let us know because that can actually influence the end-of-life impact. A couple of other remarks that I have about the data collection is that the more specific data we receive, the better the quality of the results. Really, the more the better. And I like my data to be primary and accurate, etc. But of course, if some data is unavailable, we will fill the gaps with secondary data. So don't worry about that. Another thing that in my experience is very useful is to start the data collection process from creating a detailed process diagram. So understanding the manufacturing process, the whole life cycle, etc. Because then the chance that we will miss any data becomes much, much lower, and it becomes clearer for both you and me what data we will need to collect. As I have mentioned before, regular meetings have proven extremely useful when it comes to data collection because they help avoid any stalling due to any possible issues that arise during the data collection, and we can finish the data collection process as quickly as possible. Another small remark is that it is nice to have the data source join the kickoff meeting. So specifically, when you outsource your manufacturing, then it's very nice to have the factory manager, for example, join the kickoff so that they understand what they have to do and what their role is during the data collection. We also usually provide a summary of what our contact person's responsibilities are in data collection. For example, how many hours are required on average per week to be put into the data collection, as well as what kind of meetings they will need to join and what steps need to be taken. And it's good for the person responsible for the data collection from your side to be aware of the workload so that the data collection can be planned accordingly. This was all I had to say today about the data collection process. Again, if you haven't seen the first part of the data collection tutorial, please refer to it for any general aspects of the data collection. And we also go through a customized data sheet from the Hedgehog company together during that video. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to working with you.